Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. So if you listened to the last one, you heard our new sound and intro. Hopefully you like that. It's designed to carry on forward. A little bit of something different from the old bong that we had going on at the beginning. As time goes by and my podcasting skills get better and my editing gets better, hopefully we'll keep improving. So in this podcast, I managed to grab an interview with Tom Opre, who is the director of The Last Keeper. Some people may have seen it. It's been around a few little cinemas in Scotland. I think it was also in London. It is becoming more available and hopefully it will be out very soon to stream, for example, on Amazon, Netflix and all the rest of it if he gets his way. So Tom Opre is a fairly well-known director. He's done things like Shark Week, and I think he mentions that as we get into the podcast. So I managed to catch him just after his last screening of The Keeper, which was at our local sort of activity centre. The GWCT ran it for us, and I found out that Tom was going to be in the area. He was actually down in Edinburgh, but he was coming up to get his tweeds altered. So I made a very, very quick appointment with him, and I drove over to a place called Tarland, where I popped into the shop, Pam's shop, which is mentioned in the film, and we had a quick chat, and she very kindly let us go and sit in her back garden in her summer house. So it does sound a bit echoey. Obviously, the acoustics weren't great. In the middle of that, we've got the bird song going on. We had a bit of wind come up and a bit of a storm kick off. No rain, luckily, but we did manage to record this podcast. Hopefully you will enjoy it, and it has some very relevant points. And if you do get a chance to see the film, please do, and it will explain a lot about what's happening in Scotland. It wasn't designed for a UK or Scottish audience. The film was designed for an American and worldwide audience. So there are some parts in there that talk about sort of the heritage to Scotland and all the rest of it. But the film is absolutely 100% worthwhile going to see. There are people on there that we've had on the podcast, like Scott McKenzie and a few other, guys up here, recognise them. They're just sort of the local guys, local keepers. But yeah, definitely worth going to see. Anyway, enjoy this podcast. Hello and welcome to the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. Today I am sat in a lovely garden in Tarland, actually doing a live podcast with Tom Opre, a filmmaker, in his words, a dude with a camera. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great, Peter. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for this very short notice, trying to arrange a podcast with you. But after seeing your latest creation, which is The Last Keeper, I felt it really important that we actually had a chance to meet up with you, talk about it, talk about everything that's going on in there. So yeah, how did it come about?
Well, that's a great question. I've been really blessed to travel around the world, do a lot of hunting and fishing. My dad was an outdoor writer for 30 years for Outdoor Life and Field and Stream, so I kind of grew up around it. But I've been in the film business my whole life, from Hollywood to Shark Week for Discovery Channel to mostly national television commercials in the United States. But because of a real passion for the outdoors, I've been able to see some pretty cool places and experience some great things. And in some of my conversations with friends here in the United Kingdom, I started, about 4 or 5 years ago, started hearing stories about land reform, about the fact that people in the sporting estate industry were kind of being singled out, cases of people being ostracized in their communities, children being threatened, just crazy stuff, which, we deal with similar things in so much as that, with the internet, my wife's a big hunter, and she's kind of a lightning rod. She was Mrs. Nebraska in 2003 and kind of used the sash and the pageant crown and all that stuff to go out and be a real advocate for the the conservation that comes from hunting. North America, we have a long history of it, obviously, and but of course that makes her, having the bear, a woman, a bearer of life, bringer of life, out there killing things, is kind of throws the anti-hunting people into
100%.
a whole different. They can't understand it.
No, it's a concept that probably is very alien to most.
Yeah. So when I started hearing about these stories, we started a little nonprofit called the Shepherds of Wildlife Society back in 2018. I had seen a real issue with the hunting community, and that our messaging doesn't resonate with the broader public, and there's a huge disconnect when it comes to nature. Mostly with that urban set population in the Western world, modern Western world, where most people don't even know where their food comes from. Yet they have no concept what conservation is, which is the wise use of a natural resource. Yeah. And it's something that was coined and became very real in North America. Gifford Pinochet in the late 1800s coined the word, and he is the father of the National Forest Service, and also one of the original members of the Boone and Crockett Club, which is the oldest conservation organization in the United States.
Well, your methods out in the States are completely different to, say, the UK's hunting methods, but your conservation methods have worked. You've brought animals that were on the point of extinction back to strong, healthy herds that are. Yeah,
and it's really that there's a lot of similarities in this, and so much as that today in Scotland we have this idea behind rewilding.
Yep.
I've heard things like we want nature to be better than it was. We want things to be better than it was before we were here, i.e., humans.
Yeah.
Or we want nature to be free. Those are all noble causes.
Absolutely.
They're just not very realistic in the whole thing, because what I've come to understand working on this project is things are way, way more complex than that. It works really well in fundraising for your charity, because you're talking to a group of people that you're asking for money that, again, are extremely uneducated in what the realities are on the ground. I'll use the word ignorant, but I don't mean it in a negative way.
No, I agree with you. I think that it's kind of an ignorance, a chosen ignorance at the end of the day, because you don't have to take the consequences of what your actions would be. So if you ignore it completely, that's where I think they come from.
And really what we're at, where the similarities are, I mean, we outsource everything today, right? So we outsource our killing.
Yeah.
We have someone go out and raise, and I ask people in a lot of presentations, how many people, raise your hand if you bought a McDonald's Happy Meal, the little thing with the kids, the toy for the kids. Well, everybody raises their hand. Well, I have to explain to them, there's nothing happy about a Happy Meal.
You're right. 100%.
There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. It doesn't matter if you got the cheeseburger or the chicken nuggets. You paid someone to raise and slaughter an animal to feed your kid.
Yeah.
And without the deaths of 60 billion land-based animals and 1.4 trillion water-based animals annually, that's UN data, humanity ceases to exist.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so, we start thinking about, you talked about the fact that we brought back animals in North America from the brink of extinction. Yeah, I mean, my family goes back to the 1620s. My ancestors, along with a lot of other people's ancestors, pretty well mucked up the place when it came to our resources. We thought there were infinite numbers of wildlife. We thought we had trees as far as the eye could see. And of course, in the name of progress, we pretty well decimated the place.
Yep. But
guys like George Burt Grinnell, Theodore Roosevelt, Gifford Pinochet, those guys that came in the late 1800s kind of ushered in what we call modern conservation, or the North American conservation model. And, basically the premise of it is it's about wise use. If wildlife has, or a resource has a benefit that provides value to humans, we have a tendency to take care of it.
No, absolutely, 100%. And I think that it's a fantastic model. And it works, doesn't it?
It works, but it also exists right here. The principles of it.
The principles, but it does. There's no massive regulation, and I think that's the difference. The States works on a tag system, once in a lifetime hunts. The UK,
but you don't even have a fish and game agency.
No, exactly. It's just go out, shoot what you want. Now, in some places that works, but we've seen it in this country. There is definitely parts of the country that suffer because it's overshot and things like that. But yeah, generally we have a very, very good, strong population of pretty much everything.
Yeah. No, and that's what I've experienced seeing around here. I mean, there are issues though.
Yes,
I mean,
100%.
In the Highlands, red grouse they're on a decline. I mean, most of the estates that I've talked to are very rarely, if they are shooting at all, shooting birds.
Yeah, the whole driven grouse era has become very difficult, and most keepers would say to you, we really shouldn't be shooting this, we should just leave it for a year and hopefully our numbers will come up. And they're desperate to do everything, but then the weather has changed dramatically up here, and that change in weather, it's like grouse chicks are on the ground now, and we've had 3 or 4 days of stupidly horrendous rain, which doesn't...
It was snowing in Fort William and north of there this morning, I saw on radar. But but then you've got the overloading of ticks, because ticks are now coming onto the landscape earlier in the year because of climate change. Absolutely. You're seeing obviously the disease that has tremendous effect, 80-90% mortality in adult birds. And you're seeing it seems to be ground zero, seems to be the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
Down south doesn't seem to have the same sort of effects that you're having up here.
We definitely seem to have a huge tick burden, and we're already noticing it. Like last year, a lot of the deer coming off the hill, huge tick burden already. Just shooting the roe recently, it's crazy. I did a literally, there's another podcast about it. We've just spoken to the guy that makes Rovence clothing, which is an anti-tick clothing. And I had 3 heads in a bucket, and the number of ticks that came off just those 3 heads. So that's just the head of the deer. You imagine the rest of the body. It just goes to show that the tick burden is crazy. And if that's on the hill and not being mopped up, then everything suffers.
Yeah. No, that's just going to be a problem. But kind of why did we get into making The Last Keeper? I saw that what we try to do through the Shepherd's Wildlife Society is reconnect modern society with nature. The idea there is we're trying to get social acceptance to our modern conservation model. And we know that modern conservation, where wildlife has a benefit to people, it exists and it flourishes. We see that in North America because of the North American conservation model. We see it in Southern Africa because of the ranching for wildlife model we have there. The IUCN has come out in a paper in 2016. I mean, those are the only 2 places in the world where wildlife populations are holding their own or expanding. The rest of the world, wildlife habitat's getting hammered.
Yep. And
because getting back to the food thing, we saw what happened in COVID. When you can't get to food or can't get access to food, you end up with a society that's not very stable. 100%. And governments don't like that. So we're going to continue with 8 billion humans on the planet. We're going to continue to produce more and more food, right? And so because of that, we've really come to understand that, wildlife doesn't live in cities. It doesn't live even on tops of mountains in Montana, where I'm from, because they're covered under snow and ice a big part of the year.
Yep.
It lives on fertile ground. It lives on ranches, it lives on farms, it lives on other fertile ground where humans also live. And it's those humans, that's a much smaller number of people, that country folk, the rural people, those rural indigenous communities.
Yep. Yeah.
And rural indigenous means, people that have been living someplace, in the middle of nowhere for a long time. I don't care what the color of your skin is.
No. Okay. It does. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But those are the people that literally have to do the hard work of wildlife and habitat conservation. And they have to see a benefit, because conservation is not free.
No.
And so when they do see a benefit, then we have what we talked about in North America. You see these animals populations that have come back from the brink of extinction. Obviously, we have a much larger landscape to work with than you do here in Scotland. Yeah. But there's a lot of places for wildlife here too. There is positive outcomes on this. The problem is that we live in these representative democracies. And the vast majority of people that are voting in these democracies live in that urban interface, and they have no idea that the decisions they make, case in point, Peter, they get up in the morning, they flip a switch, they expect the lights to come on. They have no idea where electricity comes from.
Nope, water comes out the tap.
Walk into the bathroom, flush the toilet, out of sight, out of mind. The next big decision of the day is it a chai latte or a caramel macchiato?
Yeah.
So, but that's not how 2/3 of the rest of the world works.
No.
And it's certainly not how rural people work, whether they be keepers here in Scotland or native, rural folks in Africa, or I'm doing a film right now about multi-generational ranching families in Montana.
Yep.
those people, if you take care of the land, it'll take care of you. And let's face it, humanity only exists because of soil, because we have to take care of the land.
One of the only things that we can't make any more of, and we are using up rapidly, is land.
Exactly. But what we're seeing, especially even, where I'm from in North America, in the United States, is the politicization of wildlife and habitat conservation. We're seeing people that are anti-use, anti-hunting groups that are very well funded, very well organized, that are pushing politicians that are looking for votes.
Yep.
So there's all these ignorant people out there that don't know anything about wildlife and habitat conservation. They're looking for votes, and they're funding these campaigns. And we're even seeing things like what we call ballot initiatives, where if you get enough signatures in a certain state, in certain districts, you can get something on the November ballot. And it doesn't, it's not so that it can be discussed, because we're not a democracy in the United States. We're a representative republic,
Absolutely.
And so the reality is we're voting for people to represent us, to talk about laws, to talk about legislation, to talk about policy. But what we end up with these ballot initiatives, it's mob rules. It's democracy. Yeah. It's like being in Athens, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, right? Totally. Everybody who's a citizen's up there standing in the stands, and they all get a vote.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty hard to get things done when everybody and their brother. And that's one of the nice things about what the founding fathers in the United States did, is they just said, hey, we're going to elect representatives so that we don't have this chaos. But when we get a situation where certain states, even my state of Montana where I live, we have a ballot initiative program. And so there's a thing called IP3 in Oregon right now, which would make it, if it gets on the ballot, it would make it an automatic felony to harm any animal, wild or domestic.
I did see something about this because it's been spoken about on socials and stuff like that. Yeah. And basically, if that gets in, realistically, it opens the door that it will lead to all hunting could basically fall under it.
It's crazy. So how do they get signatures? You first of all say, well, wait a minute. Most people realize that they're eating a steak or a burger or having eggs or whatever, right? Or bacon or whatever it is. Yeah, of course, not even thinking about the guy who goes out and shoots an elk or a deer or a pheasant or a rabbit. They go up and they collect signatures on the street corners, and they walk up to people and say, do you believe in bestiality?
Right.
No, sign here.
Yeah.
Harm an animal.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how they do it. So they're pretty creative on this stuff, and they, like I said, they got the money. Now, you and I both know that the poultry industry, the beef industry, the pork industry, these are billion-dollar industries, multi-billion-dollar. They got money. They've got attorneys. They got junkyard dog attorneys.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to get the domestic thing taken off this thing. Because remember, all it takes is a certain number of signatures. Automatically goes as a yes or no vote on the ballot.
Yep.
And so if it goes on there, we know that domestic species, that's going to go off there. But wildlife?
Yeah.
Hunting? I've been part of efforts trying to get hunting groups to at least talk to each other. And we've failed miserably.
I was just thinking, literally on the way down here, I have been thinking about, it's one of those things, especially the UK is exactly the same. We have what should be the people that stand up for the hunting groups and stand up for us. But nobody wants to raise their head above the parapet because they've all got their jobs and they're happy with their jobs, and they talk to their local councillors, etc. like that. But we need to actually stand together as a community. You've got the shotgun shooters, you've got the rifle shooters, you've got the air gun guys, you've got the fishermen. But we're all divided. We're all split because nobody can agree on anything. And if we keep doing that, and I've said it in podcast after podcast, that what happens is we're just creating the cracks, and you get your auntie comes along, and all they've got to do is keep chapping in the wedge. It's the same in the States.
Divide and conquer. That's how you win the war. And so what I've actually witnessed firsthand in my efforts is it's akin to it's not running into a brick wall, but literally being stonewalled.
100%.
And I really, it's inherent, I think, also in a sportsman's DNA. I call it the fishing hole syndrome.
Right.
I'm not going to take you to my fishing hole because you might come back and fish it.
And that is exactly, well, it's the same idea in this country. Lots of people have exactly that. Nobody wants to share because, well, he might come and steal it. He might go and approach my landowner. Yeah. And that's what it boils down to.
And there's an analogy to that. Last year, there was a bill in the UK down in Westminster, the Smith private members bill, to ban all hunting trophy imports into the UK.
Absolutely.
because of the film I did in Africa in 21 called Killing the Shepherd, which was about a rural indigenous community in Africa led by a woman chief who wanted to break the bonds of poverty by waging war against the wildlife poaching.
Right.
That film went on to win all kinds of awards, including a handful for social justice and indigenous and human rights.
Yep.
That's really what we're getting at on this. But in the case of that particular film and what was going on in Westminster last year, I get this phone call and we start talking. Literally, I reached out to a MP down there, Sir Bill Wiggins,
right,
who had spoken out against the bill. And I sent him a cold email. And of course, I'm not a constituent. I'm not even a UK citizen. So the chances of some politician responding to you is probably like ice water in hell. And the reality there is, I'll be danged if he didn't respond to me that day.
Fantastic.
He watched the educational 30-minute version of the film. And we went back and forth the rest of the day. The next day I was on the phone with his staff. The next day we were making plans because we were doing some filming up here in the Highlands for The Last Keeper. So I got on a plane afterwards. We wrapped up and flew down to Westminster. And I'm down there screening the film with these members of Parliament and these members of the House of Lords. And I'm in the Peers dining room. And I've got various lords. I won't give any names out, but they're all like, yeah, this is a bunch of hogwash. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of the law of unintended consequences here. Again, we're getting back to this fact that if wildlife has a value, it's a natural resource, then people will take care of it. Well, that's the same thing. It doesn't matter if we're in the Highlands or if we're in Montana or Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
In the case of Africa, we're in a scenario where if you all of a sudden tell these people that the value of their wildlife is zero, well, they're going to kill it all.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
They're going to kill it all.
Yeah.
And the reality you run into down there, and what I've told these politicians, I'm like, well, if you're all for this bill, then I guess you're into child bride creation. Child bride creation.
Yep.
That's what you are. You're a child bride creator.
But yeah.
And they look at me like, whoa, time out here. No, I've got a whole movie about it. I explain it to you. Here's the deal. Down there in rural Africa, where all this wildlife lives, in these hunting concessions, if you all of a sudden tell them it's not worth anything, okay, well, they're subsistence farmers for the most part. Guess what? Their crops fail, just like ours do here in North America and here in Scotland and England.
Yeah.
But they don't have crop insurance. They don't have anybody showing up. They give them handouts. They don't have the UN. The UNICEF's not there. They get no NGOs are standing at the door, and the governments don't have the wherewithal or the resources to help these people.
Yep.
Zero. So when the crops fail, they're going to utilize the wildlife because they got 8 or 9 kids. Every one of them does. Okay. Eventually, we know that wildlife resource is a finite resource, and I've witnessed areas that have been completely devoid of 95% of the wildlife because of poaching.
Yep.
So they're going to utilize that resource. But when that runs out, what are you going to do? Okay, well, if I've got a daughter or two who's reached puberty, 12, 13 years old, I can sell her to another gentleman in the community or an adjacent community for 30, 35 bags of corn. That'll feed my family for a year. Now, if you're looking at, and that's common, it's a second or third wife. And so if you're looking at basically an extinction event for your family, it's kind of hard to say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a good thing. To you and I mean, I've got 3 daughters. I mean, it just blew my mind when I was interviewing some of these gals. Because, they usually, it's a second or third wife. The husband's usually 10, 15, 20 years older. He's already got a bunch of kids on the ground. By the time these gals are 20 years old, they've got 4 or 5 kids themselves.
Yep.
And these guys, the life expectancy in the bush is 35 to 40 years old.
Yeah.
So these guys are dying, and they're having to try to take care of these kids by them, there are some families that help out and stuff. But my point to the politicians were, hey, at the end of the day, there are unintended consequences here. And the reality is one of the things that one of these lords says, well, Tom, you're here to help us connect the dots between neocolonialism and racism. And my response was, well, England's got a long history of both. And the reality is you have this Western urban group of people that are dictating policy and whether or not some little girl in Africa is going to be a child bride.
Yes.
All because they think they're doing what's right. And that's really the whole purpose of making these films. So it's to give a voice to rural communities around the world because they don't have a voice on the world stage.
No.
And in the case of what I've realized here in Scotland, you may have a voice here, but you're literally drowned out by the urban rewilders. Yeah. Because they are very adept at getting their story out. They're very smart about what they say. They're very polished in what they do. None of it has anything to do with science for the most part. So
we've also got our press, our media is very tailored to producing information that basically makes people happy. So your person that sat there watching the TV, they see the show. Oh, look, lovely, all the bird life. Thank you very much. And it's you put a gamekeeper on there who tells you a story about how we've saved the hillside and this and that. Nobody wants to know that because it doesn't tick the right box.
Well, I think probably this is something that we deal with is that there are some incredible documentary films made every year. BBC Natural History Unit down in Bristol, National Geographic, Discovery Channel. I mean, just give you a long list. You know, Sir Attenborough.
Absolutely.
Incredible films.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is the vast majority of those films omit the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room. Us, human beings.
Yeah.
You know, we're animals. We're part of this ecosystem. We are the apex predator on the planet. And there isn't a square foot of this planet that we don't have some sort of influence or impact on. I mean, take the highest point of the planet, Mount Everest. There's used oxygen bottles all over the place, trash everywhere. There's over 120 dead bodies.
Yep, that will just stay there forever.
Just stay there, well, yeah, until they figure out how to get there, I guess, with a helicopter. But the reality is that you go to the lowest point of the Earth, which is the Marianas Trench in the South Pacific. And ever since that Fukushima nuclear tsunami reactor deal, I've always thought, shit goes downhill, right? Well, sure enough, National Geographic paid to do a survey and surveyed the biological creatures in the Marianas Trench, and they found after that event that those creatures have been exposed to more and greater pollutants than the most polluted rivers in China today.
Wow.
And I've spent time in China, guys. It's not a pretty place.
No.
There is no environmental protection agency. There is no laws that protect the environment like we have in the United States and have, obviously in this country.
It just happens. China is developing. China is getting ahead. Nothing stands in its way, does it?
No different than what our ancestors, or at least my ancestors, did in North America in the 1600s, 1700s,
exactly.
1800s.
Yeah.
We're going to go. It's all about progress.
Yeah,
100%.
100%.
And unfortunately, the ramifications on that are a big issue. But what we see here, though, is there's this real need to give these rural communities a voice because, for a long time in North America, we talked about our modern conservation, North American conservation model. We raise billions of dollars for conservation every year, through excise taxes, through license sales, permits, and whatnot. That doesn't even include all the products, which is many, 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 many billions of dollars.
Yep.
We're talking about the firearms, the ammunition, the clothing, the boots, the camouflage, the tents, the backpacks, all the things, the hunting leases, the crops people plant. I mean, it's crazy what goes on in our part of the world. But you have a scenario where people don't care about the money. We can talk about millions of animals brought back to the brink of extinction.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. We can talk about the fact that we're these great wildlife and habitat conservation. I'm talking about hunters here.
Yeah.
It means absolutely nothing to the 39-year-old housewife in Hoboken, New Jersey. She's all about the warm and fuzzy. It's all emotional to her, and so. We all know what the definition of insanity is, right? Keep repeating the same thing over and over, expecting the same results, but you don't get them.
Yep.
That's the hunting community.
Yeah, pretty much.
We've been sitting there telling the world about this and that and the other thing, and then at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything to the people that actually vote.
No.
Again, we're getting back to that politicization of conservation. So now we're in a scenario where we have to figure out a different way to skin this cat, right?
Yeah.
And the reality here is what we've come up with, and we've done the focus group research. We know what people in America, we're looking at 60 to 70, maybe as much as 80% of the population that falls in the middle. These aren't people that are strongly for or against hunting or a modern conservation model. It's those people that we need to get social acceptance of modern conservation. And those people have a 90%, based on our focus group research, a 90% approval rate of hunting, as long as it's done for the right reason. And the number one reason is consumption.
Yes.
If you take that same group of people, our research showed, Same exact people that are okay with 9 out of 10 with hunting and use the word safari or trophy in front of the word hunting, they go into the 97% negative.
Yes, 100%. I
Which
can
is simple,
understand that. Yeah.
because that's how the anti-hunting lobby, which in the United States collects about $1 billion based on their tax returns every year, cumulative. They take that $1 billion, and that's how they raise money. It's the evil trophy hunter.
Yeah, of course. And we are all tarred with the same brush instantly.
Yep.
Like that conversation I had, the UK market, you say hunting, and people just say fox hunting, ripping a fox apart with a bunch of dogs. They don't understand the whole other concept of what's out there and why it has to be done. So the deer population in the UK, in some parts of the UK, is out of control because there is no management of those deer. And it has, unfortunately, been used for trophy hunting. Populations of fallow that are now crazy because somebody owns a large swathe of land and they only want to make the big money by shooting the big bucks. So the population goes out of control, but nobody else can get on there because it's my bit of land.
Yeah, and I'm friends with Mike Robinson, the chef down there, down in England. And Mike had my wife and I out last year, and he's got a little, I think they call it the venison deer box or something like that. Yeah, deer box. And so it was really interesting because we actually helped them secure, shot a bunch of deer for the deer box for the venison business. And just the process went through there, but the number of fallow deer that we were seeing, I mean, just crazy numbers.
Super herds, to the point.
And the thing is, and I've talked to people here in this country, it's like, hey, there's this perception that hunting in this country is an elitist, very expensive thing and whatnot. Yet, you and I have talked about what it costs to go on stalking, right? For roe deer or red deer, whatever else. Your cost to go hunting in this country, to go with someone who's going to take you, so in the United States we call it outfitted hunting, guided and outfitted, is itty bitty little amount of money. You want to come to Montana and hunt a mule deer, you better have $6,500.
Oh yeah, no, I've looked at prices to go out to the States.
And if you want to go someplace that really has good big mule deer, you better have 13 to 14,000, maybe 20,000 in some places.
Yep.
You better have some serious bucks. If you want to go hunt a elk in the White Mountain Apache reservation in Arizona,
right?
It's a 4 to 5 year waiting list, and it's $30,000 US.
Wow!
For a week. Now, of course, you're going to have an opportunity to see a 300 to 400 inch bull, which is a very, could be a, what we'd call like a 6x6 or even a 7x7 big bull. 8, 9, 10 years old, incredible genetics, really big animals, which, because every hunter's like, well, I'd like to get the biggest buck or the biggest bull someday, which it's inherent in our DNA, it's bragging rights at the end of the day. And it's not bragging rights in so much as that historically it's like humans say, well, look how great I am. It's more of the reason why we hung those antlers and those skulls on the front of our domiciles, no matter where you lived in the world, no matter how far back we go in time, was a signpost to show that we, as a man or a woman, whatever the situation was, can supply and can provide for the people that are part of our family, our community.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's face it, at the end of the day, we'd like to have, somebody with us, a wonderful mother, wife that can bring children in so we can further our DNA.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of, it's not that, you hear a lot of people talk about, especially the anna hunters, will talk about hunting trophies and say, oh, this is all about egos and stuff. And unfortunately, I like to use the analogy of real estate. 95% of the real estate is sold by 5% of the realtors. Why? Because they're good at it. 5% of the hunters put out 95% of the BS that you see. And because of social media, anybody can post anything at any time, and it can be seen anywhere in the world. There's no checks and balances. No. And so that can create a perception to these people that are ignorant to the realities of conservation and what people are doing on the ground, or the time and money and things that they spend. It can create a perception that this is all being done for egos, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And there are people that hunt because that is why. That's the motivation. It's like, hey, I want to win an award. I want to put something in a record book. And of course, those things, when you start looking at our focus group research, which is not only talking about hunting, but we get really into conservation. What are the messages that would resonate with those people that we're targeting?
Yeah.
And who are the messengers?
Yes.
And it's not the old white guy who wants to go to Safari Club.
No. And I think we touched on it just before we started the interview. It was talking about like my way of taking people hunting. It's not about the trophy, it's about actually the education, so that they've come out, they've come stalking, they've gone through everything. They may have ended up shooting a medal just because it was the only deer that appeared that day. But they can go back and they can sit down with a group of non-hunting friends and they can explain it. And to be honest, that's our educators. They're the people we want to be able to send away and go, you go and sit in a pub and have a few beers and explain why. Because if I do it, people just go, well, you hunt, that's what you're doing. But if you send somebody that's done it for the first time, it's priceless.
Yeah, and if you can get a woman out there,
yeah,
I got news for you. There's some pretty dang good women out there hunting these days. And,
absolutely.
Like I said, I think we talked about this earlier. I mean, this is the bringer of life, and so it just baffles the anti-hunters that a woman would want to go out there. But again, she wants to provide for a family.
But I've had a few ladies on the podcast, but it's again, they get a massive. It's the anti-hit that a female that goes hunting, if she posts anything.
Yeah.
We did a social experiment. I had a friend out, both posted the same photo, load of abuse and load of comments, even from hunters on her picture. Zip on mine. Just let it go, because man hunting, lady hunting, and that's the problem we've got. So a lot of these great female hunters, unless they've got the confidence to stand up for it, which some of them do,
yep.
Some of them just sit quietly in the background and just tick by because they don't want to be out there, because the public will. And unfortunately, it's even people within the hunting community that still will try and take them apart, telling them they're doing something wrong. And that's where, yeah, we're doing this podcast now, and a lot of the people that will listen to it will be from the hunting community, but there will be some people from outside. And sometimes it's a really difficult situation. If we've got problems with our own community, how do we've got to sort our own house out first, haven't we?
Yeah, and that's a good point you bring up, Peter, there. One of the things that we firmly believe in at the Shepherd's Wildlife Society is that there needs to be an ethics reset in modern hunting. What do I mean by that? Well, we talk about posting of we call it the grip and grin picture. Somebody's sitting there with a grin on their face holding a dead animal.
Yeah.
Now, you have to understand, I don't care if it's a lion, an elephant, or a deer, or a pheasant, or whatever it is. You really don't, to that broader public that's completely disconnected from nature and where their food comes from, what you look like to them is no different than these ISIS terrorists in Syria that were running around in black jumpsuits, cutting off the heads of human beings.
Yep.
On video, on YouTube. You still watch it today with a knife.
Yep. Yeah.
Because they don't get the idea. It's real easy to take the act of killing something and demonize it. And it's really easy to demonize hunters because of that. Yet every single person that's listening to this podcast, every single person on this planet is responsible for killing something every day. And many, many, many somethings. I mean, I don't care if you're a vegetarian. I mean, think about the loads of fertilizers and soil, topsoil that we lose on our crops, and the herbicides that are put on the ground that are meant. I mean, we literally put on crops in the ground, and the idea is the farmers there fighting to kill anything and everything that wants to eat the crop.
If it's going to eat your crop, we need to kill it. And and that's the disconnect, isn't it? People don't see that. As long as it turns up in a packet, you don't have to worry about that fine line of where did it come from to start with.
Yeah, and that brings up a great point too. Prior to COVID, we saw some research, focus group research done, where literally they asked the high schoolers in the public schools of Chicago about where does their burger come from, and 47% of them didn't know it came from an animal.
Yep.
They thought it just came from the grocery store, and that's part of that disconnect. But the research we've done has also shown that if you can get them to understand what the realities are on the ground when it comes to conservation, and you can use the right people, the right messengers to tell the right messages. Yeah, like I said, these people, and I don't mean it negatively, they're ignorant. But once you get them, it's almost to a T that they come around and say, you know what, I don't care to go hunting myself, but I understand what you're doing. There's a reason why there's birds and bird feeders, and deer and turkey in backyards. And in the United States, the reason why we have national forest is because of hunters who went hunting.
Yep.
That is the reality of it. And that is probably, like we said earlier, 8 billion humans on the planet. Somebody's got to be taking care of these places. They've got to be a good steward or a good shepherd of these lands, these rural lands that are wildlife habitat. And if we don't, then we're going to lose all this stuff. And there's estimates that we could see a doubling of our human population in the next 50 to 100 years. What is the carrying capacity? Because we're seeing more. There's more humans on the landscape here than we've ever seen, right? And it all goes back to really the use of fossil fuels. And now we're at a position where, as a species, we can produce almost unlimited amounts of food, and we can store it for almost unlimited amounts of time.
Yeah.
So, and you take into account, technological advances in science and medicine and whatnot.
Our population is aging. We now have it used to be, as you said, you've just touched on the point, like Africa, 30 to 35. The Western world, it's 80, 90, potentially 100 now. That's a huge burden on stretching out lifespans. Mm-hmm. And every human therefore requires more food, more energy. So we have to produce it from somewhere. And I think that's where, and everybody wants it cheap. We noticed a big thing in Scotland, as you talked about COVID. As soon as COVID hit and there was a food shortage, there was a couple of guys that started offering like venison boxes, because we still had to go out, we still had to deal with the deer because trees were being damaged, but the game dealers weren't taking anything. So what did you do? We were butchering it up and you giving it away. And all of a sudden, people that had never had game were very happy to accept meat if it was hung on a bag on the front of your door and stuff like that. No questions where it came from, but it allowed it to go out there. But it's a funny one.
Well, so that's an interesting concept. We saw a big uptick in hunting license sales in the United States during COVID. So more people are going to the field. And of course, we have this tradition of, going back to, in 1776, the Revolutionary War, jettisoning, King George, and being able to do what we do and what our founding fathers set up, where wildlife is in the public trust. We have this whole system of licensing and management of the land, and hunters are paying for the conservation and the science, and through the biology, and then the conservation officers or game wardens that are protecting the resource from, because you always got a few bad apples in every bushel. So, but that's the reality there. But the thing that was really interesting to me was that in America, because of our market hunting past, we can't sell our game animals to a game dealer. There's no game dealers in the United States like you guys have here. And it was one of the fascinating things about working on this project, The Last Keeper here in Scotland, was the fact that the game dealer industry is a pretty serious industry. We spent some time with Highland Game in Dundee, and we're told that they process something like 60,000 red deer in their facilities, and we filmed it. And of course, you can go to downtown London to Costco and you can buy venison burgers and meatballs and steaks and stuff. You can't do that in the United States. Now, you can do it if it comes from a farm.
Okay.
But all of our wild game, every single state has a law against selling your wild game. Now, the only place you can get wild game are the exotics in Texas, and because they're not considered natives. There's a way that they're able to get that through. But because of our market hunting past in the United States, we haven't been able to do that. And I really part of our disconnect, at least in North America, is because people can't eat wild game unless you know somebody or you source it yourself. Now, take, for instance, Scandinavian countries. There's a 90, 95, 97% approval rate of hunting.
Yep. Because
the national dish is reindeer, caribou. You can buy it in the grocery store. You can buy moose. You're part of a club. You go out and I put a moose in there, and you can sell the moose to the butcher, and he can put it in the case there, and people come and have fresh moose. And that was one of the cool things. We were at Castle Game in Edinburgh.
Yep.
And they're usually, I think it's mostly roe deer they process there, but they do everything right there. And I watched this steady stream of people come through the door one day as we were filming, and I think it was Terry, the previous owner. He was in there working, and he's. Literally people come in and say, hey, I want to get, a couple pounds of ground meat. And he's pulling off meat off this haunch, put it in the grinder, grind it up in the bag, weighing it, putting the price on it. It's never been frozen.
No.
It was on the field yesterday. I mean, you want to talk about the ultimate free-range, GMO-free, healthy, organic meat source that any human could ever eat was right there.
Yeah.
And it's in our fields here. It's in our forest. And it's really part of, I almost think in North America, we need to make it mandatory that our national forests and our public lands are managed for the production of game.
Yeah.
And figuring out ways that we can get wild game into people's mouths. For instance, we've got a franchise business that sells burgers, well, not burgers per se, but that's called Arby's, and they do kind of the sliced shaved beef sandwich and whatnot. And but every November, mid-November, when the deer season opens in most of North America, they have a wild game burger.
Okay.
And sometimes it might be red deer from New Zealand. It could be something else. I've seen in the past they've had duck burgers.
Okay.
But it's all quote unquote wild game, right?
Yeah.
It's all farmed because of the laws in the United States. But I'll be dang if that thing doesn't sell out in 24 to 48 hours every year.
Yeah.
So getting back to the fact of talking about what people like here. I mean, here you can eat wild game. So I think you guys got part of your problem solved.
We just need more people to take the uptake on it.
Get more people out doing it. But in Africa, bushmeat,
it's gone before.
It's a $2 billion black market industry.
Yep.
I mean, we had one of my kids was big into football, or American soccer, and we had the UK coaching clinic come over, and they during COVID, these guys needed a place to stay, so we ended up with 3 coaches at our house.
Right.
2 of them from here and one from Nigeria, and we were working on the film in Zambia, and I had just gotten some pictures sent to me on WhatsApp from the operator down with some anti-poaching stuff where they captured some of these poachers with the little packages of dried bushmeat.
Right.
Say little, I mean they're about the size of a I don't know what you call over here, but about a
like
softball.
Yeah.
And so they, I just as a lark, I just showed the pictures to this young man. He's black. He's from Nigeria, and I'm like, hey, what do you think of this? Oh man, that's bushmeat, man. That's good shit. And I was like, you know what this is? He goes, oh yeah, we eat it all the time. This is a kid who lives in a city in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And Nigeria's not known for having wildlife. And again, I think humans, wild game is really important for us to eat it and have it be a part of our daily lives.
You just know, well, it's 100%. There's nothing been pumped into it. It's had no antibiotics. It's had no modifications. Its genetic line is what it is. It's wherever it's come from. And if it was a poor quality animal, it's probably died out. So you know that it's not like keeping a breed of sheep that you've changed over the years to make them. You look at some, I don't know, let's pick one like a Texel type of sheep. It's like the bulldog of sheep on the hill kind of thing. It's just full of muscle designed for the table. Whereas you get other sheep that are skinny because they're designed for wool and things like that, or hardy because they live in the middle of nowhere. We've modified everything, but we haven't modified our game. It is as it basic. Well, some of it's changed, but most of it's as it roamed the land from day one.
Well, and you just brought up the word modified. So let's go back to the Last Keeper.
Yep.
Let's face it, folks. Humans, for as long as two things. For as long as we've been on this planet, walked on 2 feet, one thing is we've hunted.
Yep.
The second thing is humans have been, and I'll use the word terraforming or manipulating of the land. We have been trying, since we have been on this land, to make the land better for our own species survival.
100%.
So in North America, where I'm from, Native Americans, before Northern Europeans showed up, literally burned the ground all the time. Africans today do it all the time. In order to increase the the vitality of the land, make it more fertile. And of course, in this place, here in Scotland, I've run into crofters that are burning the entire hillsides.
Yep. And
you can't tell me that people haven't been burning this for a long time. Of course, now we have the situation of the muir burn, right?
Yes.
Of course, it's being done to increase the population of a specific species of birds so that people can enjoy the opportunity of shooting them, hunting them, whatever you want to call it. And it's fascinating because what you do, what the muir burn and what the management for wild grouse, it absolutely is a carbon copy of what we do in the United States. Different habitat, but the same concept. Low intensity burning. Though you guys do small areas, we do much larger areas. And the suppression of ground predators.
Yep.
We do that in the southeastern United States for wild quail. Where we do that, we have lots of wild quail. Where we don't do that, we don't have very many quail.
But you also have a huge other population that lives in there, because suddenly this land that you've burnt off, as you touch on in the film, and any keeper in Scotland knows, suddenly it's not just grouse that can use that. It's all these other wading birds. They've got access. Suddenly they've got access to softer ground, good ground, new shoots, everything like that. So, and because the predators are being managed, which will prey on them, you suddenly have a flourish, and wildlife is there. So this whole thing about it's the biggest point the antis love to shout about, isn't it? They all come in and they go, a grouse moor is devoid of life. Well, I tell you what,
a desert.
It's a desert.
Wildlife desert. I'm like, wait a minute. Have you actually walked on a grouse moor? Have you spent more than 10 minutes on a grouse moor?
Have you seen how many things? Okay, it's devoid potentially of, you're trying to reduce the population of your predator species, foxes, stoats.
But how many people see predators when you walk?
But most people don't, because they're so noisy and blind when they're actually walking out there. They miss all of that. And if you take in 5 minutes and just sit and let the world go round you, it's amazing what you see on the hill. It's a totally different world, and it doesn't actually have to be the hill. It's anywhere. If you just, modern society, we don't take time to sit. Everything is a rush. How fast can we get here? When can we get there? What's the timing? What's the schedule? We've got to just go and sit out. And that's one of the things that everybody knows about me for my hunting, is it's just taking that moment to go and sit out in nature, switch off everything, and let the world just, it opens up around you, doesn't it? And
yeah,
and if we could take society and just grab people and go, sit here, it's boring, there's no internet, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't realise, and things happen, and I think you show that beautifully in the film.
Well, and there's a reason, when you said, when you start managing enhanced land, I mean, let's face it, the reason why we do what we do at Shepherd to Wildlife Society is because the man's impact on the land is not pretty around the world, and we're losing more and more wildlife habitat. If we don't have habitat, folks, then we don't have a discussion whether or not somebody pulls a trigger. Okay, there isn't going to be anything. And my goal at the end of the day is to leave this place better than I found it, in so much as that I want my great-great-grandchildren, to see and be able to experience the things I have.
Yes.
And if we take care of the land, it'll take care of us. It's good for us to be really good stewards of the land, because at the end of the day, we're better neighbors with everything else that lives on the planet, because like you said, there's that coattail effect, because there are more grouse or turkeys or quail or whatever it is. If we manage what is left of our wildlife habitat and we enhance it so that we have a responsibility as a species here, because like I said, we've mucked things up pretty bad.
Oh yeah.
And we're still mucking things up. But we do have this, especially in the Western world, obviously we think so highly of ourselves, we can tell, the third world how to live. But that's what we try to do.
We try to, exactly.
Especially people living in cities. But at the end of the day, I think, we can be, this is about, not only vibrant habitats, healthy forest, healthy wildlife and vibrant wildlife populations, but this is about clean drinking water.
Yep.
People don't realize that, in the United States, we have an outfit called Ducks Unlimited, and their whole thing is about, protecting habitat from, say, being drained due to farming practices or market influences or whatever. But the idea is to create and enhance as much habitat as possible because of waterfowl production, right? But not only, they spend all this time and money, doing that, but not only do the waterfowl do really well. We're literally, I think over the last 3 or 4, 5 decades now, waterfowl populations are at all-time highs.
Right.
But what are all the other creatures that live in that ecosystem? It's everything down to the single-cell amoebas, right? All the plant life, everything, all benefits. But guess what? You know where human drinking water comes from? It gets filtered through our marshes and our swamps. Yeah. And that's how it filters down into these aquifers. It doesn't come from rivers. The Mississippi River goes out to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It goes all the way out to, the channel.
Yeah.
It doesn't sit around and go in the aquifer. It goes out into the salt water, which we can't drink.
It's what soaks down the peat on the hill. Everything. It's all a natural filter system. It's all doing. Yeah. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe London direction down south, it's all recycled water. That's so people are drinking the same water over and over. Whereas we know in Scotland you get water, and it's one of the best things about being up here. is there's pretty much an unlimited supply.
That's how they make whiskey, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is one of the best medicines.
Yeah.
But it's a really tricky situation. As I say, people listening to this podcast, they're all on the same page. Hopefully there will be people that pick this up that are interested and want to know more and then can ask the questions, and it's a starting point. But yeah, I think education, which is what the film offers, and I hope that more people and the rest of the UK population can see this, so it's not just some keepers that are posting on social media ranting and raving about it, but really they can understand, because I think you hit the nail on the head, and it portrays, it shows everything, and it's not them and us, it's just trying to get across a really good picture of the struggle that we have. We have no voice up here. We can shout about it, but it's almost like it just hits the border and it doesn't get out, and everybody just moans about Scotland.
Yeah, no, and it's I think it's really people need to understand, The Last Keeper is a film that it's not a film about keepers per se. It's not a film about sporting estates per se. It's not a film about rewilders. It was really important for me, and it is in all my projects, to really allow for competing or even opposing viewpoints to discuss the issues in a way, because, let's face it, we're probably, I think, first time ever, somebody's been able to get all these different voices,
100%.
From Peter Cairns, Scotland Big Picture, Nigel Fraser, the chairman of the board for Trees for Life, David Balhari, the CEO from John Muir Trust, Andy Whiteman, the land reformer. It's fascinating talking. And of course, we've got podcasts ourselves. We took all these interviews, and they're so incredible. We put them on our Shepherds of the Wild podcast so people can listen to the entire interviews. And because, films, you can only put so much into a film. And so, but it's really important that, for me in this project is getting out a really broad spectrum of voices and opinions. And just, again, it's half filmmaking, half investigative journalism. And at the end of the day, I'm not here to create propaganda.
No.
I'm biased, yeah. I'm biased for wildlife, and I'm biased for the land. Okay? And if you're going to do something to screw either one of them, I'm going to work against you.
No, and that's really nice. And it came across in the way that the film was produced. It wasn't like, yeah, I'm a hunter and you're all wrong. You allowed them to speak, and it was one of those things that you could see that the ones that are almost trying to preach the message are the ones that come unstuck during their interviews and things like that.
Well, it's spin, right? It's rhetoric, it's spin. I've come to really understand, especially this film brought home to me, these charities, these NGOs, these nonprofits really have no reason to exist, Peter, unless there's a crisis.
Yep.
Because you can't exist if you don't have any money. Well, you can't raise money if you don't have a crisis.
Of course.
Okay? You go to the donor and say, listen, the world's coming to an end. I need £1 million. Okay, the donor strokes out the check. Next year, you go to the donor and says, well, the world's coming to an end. We did a pretty good job, but we still got some more work to do. I need $1.2 million this year. Well, wait a minute. Well, salaries have gone up. Now the government's made us pay more in taxes, for payroll.
Yeah.
Or insurance or some other thing, Okay, and then so what happens is what I'm showing here is a goalpost.
Yeah, no,
for
100%.
American football.
Yeah.
It keeps moving and moving and moving and moving. And, and I don't mean to say that these organizations are disingenuous. They have a purpose, right? But sometimes I think a lot of the purposes that are created, especially when it comes to what I've seen here in the Highlands, it's all a means to an end. It's to propagate money.
It's all to keep people in the job.
And to have power.
Yep.
Because there's egos involved here.
Yep.
And there are groups out there that we interviewed that have pretty good conduit to people in power in your government and the political parties. And to the point where I'll share this with you guys, there are people that we tried to talk to that were afraid to talk to us.
Yep. Yeah.
Especially scientists. There's some incredible research that's come out of an institute in Aberdeen about carbon sequestration and this whole idea of planting, especially non-native trees up on the upland, heather moorland, where there's an iron hardpan. And, and that's a fascinating story. There's a couple things I'd like to see come out of this film. And I was, very blessed and lucky to be able to go down to Holyrood this week and spend some time with some MPs down there, showing the film to them, explaining to them what we've come up with, and the response was incredible.
Which is great. That's good.
I'm hoping that we can get somewhere. One, obviously, is I think we need to figure out some ways that rural people, country folk, their voices don't get drowned out.
Yeah.
Almost like a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
But the other thing is this whole idea of planting trees on upland heather moorland that has a iron hardpan that has literally evolved over thousands of years. When I first started the project, we ended up in Aviemore, and Neil McIntyre, wildlife photographer, is now part of our organization, the Shepherd's Wildlife Society, as a fellow photographer.
Right.
He took me up to Kinrara, where he had a relative that used to be the keeper there. And just showed me what was going on, and I'm seeing all these fences, and I'm seeing these big 45-ton track hoes, and they're out digging through the soil, driving over the top of this stuff, and I'd done some research, and I knew that upland heather moorland, according to the '92 Rio UN meeting on biodiversity, had specifically said that the upland heather moorlands are an ecosystem of importance, i.e. of concern, i.e. there's not a lot of it, and the majority of it's right here in the United Kingdom.
Don't go digging
it up.
A lot
of it right here in the Highlands. And I'm watching these 45-ton tracos going around digging holes, and it was it just kind of blew me away. I was like, of course it was out there, and I mean there was no wildlife that we saw, no raptors, no grouse. I mean, and I'm used to walking around and seeing a fair number of animals out there. And of course, being a hunter myself, I know how to find things.
Yeah.
And so it was crazy. And then I sat down with Dr. James Fenton down in Oban, and we did an interview. I spent a couple of days with him, and he started explaining to me the evolution of the land here in Scotland. 9,000 years ago, it was covered in glacial ice. The ice recedes. You've got plant life and animal life colonizing the island. Probably a pretty good amount of the land mass probably had some sort of shrubbery or trees on it. Of course, you got lots of granite in this part of the world, which trees don't grow in granite.
Exactly. Yep.
And but he said, 3,000 to 7,000 years ago, because you get 60 inches of rain, this water coming down through the trees and the leaves and the pine needles, you get acidification of the soil, and to the point where you get pot soils created. The soil can't even, it's too acidic for worms and things like that. And of course, the creation of peat and all the other things that go on that. But you also get this iron hardpan that's created. And I was like, of course, an iron hardpan. I mean, wherever you have that, everybody, well, to say everybody, but I'm pretty well versed in that stuff. You can't plant trees on it because the trees, the roots can't break. They can't
break through it. The only
thing that lives on it is shrubs and grass.
Yeah.
But that's the way nature intended it. And of course, see, what he's talking about is something that's evolved over thousands and thousands of years. It's letting nature be free. And so we filmed this, and I did the interview, and then came back a couple months later with our photographer, Tony Bynum, and we went up to Kinrara. Trees are planted, all these little saplings or little root stalks in there. And I'm looking at the soil. I'm like, Tony, what color is all this to you? No, I'm red green colorblind, so.
Right.
And he's like, dude, it's red. I said, it's all rust. He goes, yeah, it's all rust. And so it finally brought everything back to full circle for me. I mean, these people are destroying thousands of years of soil history. They're spending hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars or pounds to create something that Mother Nature never intended to have on the landscape. Will the trees grow once you do that? Yeah, they'll grow.
They'll grow slow, but they'll grow.
Be fine. Yeah. And but at the end of the day, and that was the other thing, the majority of these forests that are being planted are Sitka spruce, Douglas fir, and larch.
They're a cash crop.
Yeah, but those are species from North America.
Yeah.
And what the ecologists tell me, within the next 10 years, the predominant species of tree in Scotland is going to be the Sitka spruce because they're reproducing.
Yeah. They naturally seed, they crack on. Nobody wants Scotch pine because it's such a slow grower and things like that. And it doesn't have a use. Whereas all of this Sitka spruce, you can grow it quickly, you can harvest it, you get it out, you get saw timber, you get biomass.
Yeah, but let's okay. So two things. One is I hope that it becomes illegal to go out and dig holes through thousands of years of soil history. If you try to do the same thing in the United States, every environmental group in the world will be suing you within the hour.
Yep.
So, but here, we plant trees with what we call a dibble bar. Steel bar, stick it in the ground, push it to the side, put that bare rootstock down, tamp around it, make sure it sits straight up, and go make the next tree. You guys use 45-ton tracos.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
stupid.
Called mounding. So you basically you get a piece of soil out of the ground that you can plant a tree in. 90% of the trees, either if you get it wrong, if the tree planter's a bit lazy, you either get a dead tree after a few weeks because it dries out the soil, there's no moisture in it, or they plant it in the bottom of the hole, it never sees the light, the weeds grow around it, you get a dead tree.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is shouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, also though, because you get so much rainfall and these non-native trees that you're planting here, I've literally looked at cuts and I'm looking at the tree rings on these stumps. Of course, the first tree in the row that's got access to the most light and moisture, the first 20 years, the rings will be an inch apart.
Yep. Once
you get after 20 years, because it's a rotational cut of 60 years on these things, right?
Yep.
So when you get to the next 40 years, they go down to like half an inch or a quarter of an inch. You go to the very second tree, the second row inside, the first 10 years, they're an inch.
Yep.
And then after that, they go to like half an inch to a quarter inch. You don't get the kind of structural timber that we get in the United States and of course they stack them on top of each other. It's a real problem because, the only thing that those trees are really good for is toilet paper.
And burning.
Toilet paper and disposable diapers.
Yep. Yeah.
That's what it's good for.
Yeah.
And you're destroying, and that soil, in many cases, if it is up in an area that did have an iron pan, you've already destroyed it. And so it's a real problem here. And then, you talk to the rewilding people, and I asked this question several times. It's like, well, why are we targeting this upland moorland? We know that's a habitat of concern, i.e. there's not a lot of it in the planet. And they're like, well, and I'm like, why don't you guys target that marginal farmland that doesn't have an iron hard pan, that doesn't have an access issue? I mean, it's easy to get in and plant trees and everything else, because it doesn't seem to me, and now that I know that is, that upland heather moorland is the wilderness of Scotland and the Highlands. Yeah. That's the way it was intended to be. That's the way it should be. And of course, the grouse, the wild red grouse that live there, if you plant trees, they don't live in trees. No. And so they're gone.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting, in some of these screenings, we've had some rewilders come up there. I remember some young gals in Fort William came up to me and she says, well, we have this biodiversity crisis. And I'm like, well, I'm really trying to understand this because, when it comes to grouse, your populations of grouse in the Highlands are plummeting. And we talked about disease. We talked about tick loads. Of course, we talked about planting trees, destruction of habitat. Of course, the red deer, they're being, eliminated every left and right anywhere. Your government's spending hundreds of millions of pounds every year to hire contractors to eradicate them. So I would say that your red deer are under the gun. I asked this young gal, I go, what are the other species of animals that that are going downhill that create this biodiversity crisis? And you know what her answer was? We don't talk about individual species. And I looked at her and I said, no offense, ma'am, but why the hell are we even here talking? Yeah. Because if we can't talk about individual species, then how do we know what it is we're trying to affect?
Yeah, no, 100%. Because at the end of the day, we have to look at every one of those species because everything has something different that it requires to survive, doesn't it?
100%, yeah. And like I said, I mean, there's a lot of issues here in this country when it comes to your wildlife. Overpopulation of some of these other species. We talked a little bit earlier about, obviously the fallow deer and I don't know what the sika deer came from, but the fallow deer, they came across originally, I think, from the Romans.
Yep.
And then I think the Normans enjoyed stalking them, so they brought some more over. I'm not as well versed in the history of sika deer.
Well, the sika, the Chinese water deer, again, we're all brought over to be put in the deer park so people could see them. People like the idea of letting them out because if you had a few out, there was a few wild ones. Some have escaped, but they've obviously thrived. Sika again have thrived up here. They've thrived down on the south coast. Chinese water deer are definitely, the big population is down Woburn direction because that's where they were, and they love the farmland and they're doing well. And then you've got your muntjac moving around the place. So yeah, we have a fantastic diversity of deer. But again, people don't realise that the red deer are being persecuted on the hill massively.
And that was one of the craziest things for me. When I first started the project, my first inklings is that there were no trees in Scotland and there were deer everywhere. When I got here after the first 10 or 15 days and we drove around, we went from one end to the other. We're here in Aberdeenshire, we were in Muck, we were up in Skye. We covered some ground. I hardly saw any deer. And boy, all along these glens and these, down this lowland, and we're obviously not upland, heather, moorland. There's trees everywhere.
Yep.
Except for where you've got farms and crop. Where you're planting, stuff, and which, you could take all this lowland down here, and I don't mean lowland Scotland. You could say that, but any of the glens here in the Highlands you have these farms on them with all these trees along the edges and stuff. It looks no different than Pennsylvania, Ohio, or Indiana.
Yeah,
because we have a pretty serious farming community, and that land is fertile and it's producing for people. And it's the same thing here. That land's 100%. Coming here. And, one of the things that people really didn't want to talk about on the deer thing was the 8 million sheep that are on the landscape here. And we talked a little bit about this initially, but the reality, I looked at it, Montana in 1900, we were the kingdom of ground zero for sheep production in the world, and we didn't have enough hay to feed sheep in the wintertime. We had pretty bad winters, and so we started importing hay from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, whatnot. Of course, we got all their weeds, and so now today we're dealing with a real problem with non-native weeds. We call them noxious weeds, and they outcompete our native forage grounds and grasses and so forth. And so we spray them, we do all that stuff. But one of the things we do as a biological control is we put sheep and goats on them because they eat them.
Yeah.
And so, when I'm looking at, especially in the West Coast on some of these places where, the land looks like it's manicured, there's sheep eating on it every day, and they're lawnmowers. They go around. Anything green pops up, boom, they eat it. And, what I know of the red deer, very similar to, as far as what they eat during the course of the year, is very similar to the American elk. They're woody browsers during a certain time of the year. I don't know a lot of red deer elk that are out looking specifically to eat little trees in July, August, January. Maybe in January. But what I try to liken this to is that, of course, you've planted all these trees someplace, and let's say you and I go ice fishing in Norway.
Yep.
And it's 40 below zero, and it's blowing, and it's cold, and Joe has got an ice shanty over there that he didn't lock up. Well, where are you and I going to go?
Exactly.
We're going to go in his ice shanty and get the heck out of the weather.
Yeah.
Your red deer evolved for thousands of years on these open hillsides. Like I said, 1750, we know that the Roy Military Survey, that there was only 5% of the landscape had trees on it. Yeah. And that's pre-industrial revolution, okay? There's no lorries, logs on them. None of this shit exists, right? Yeah. And there's no reason for it. Yeah, they were building ships and whatnot, but people lived on the coast. There wasn't anybody in the Highlands.
No. And to move
there still isn't hardly anybody in the Highlands.
To move the timber from the Highlands to the coast was almost phically impossible.
You didn't have a whole bunch of horses. You didn't have wagon trains, and you certainly didn't have steam locomotives or anything like that. And the reality there is that I see a lot of people constructing some sort of theme here, some storyline in order to propagate what they think they want to do to control the land.
It's a point the finger situation. If we can make something be the target, the problem, deer, let's point the finger. The deer do all the damage. But actually, if you take a step back, and I think we quickly touched on this before we started the podcast, you take a step back and you go, well, look at the landscape. Deer graze and they move on, and they'll keep moving on. But you put sheep in there, and exactly as you said, they're hoovers. And you can take two bits of landscape and take a photo of it, and it's people like, oh, it's overgrazed. It's the deer that are killing the heather, and they're over-hammering it and all the rest of it. It's like, well, actually, you've got a huge flock of sheep on there that are literally lawn mowing this. Take the sheep away, look at next door. They don't have sheep, but they've got deer. Their landscape's totally different.
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing too. You're talking about having trees, which I've been in some places like in the Isle of Skye where Scott McKenzie's estate that he works on. I'll screw up the name in Gaelic, but Ili Larman or Ilian Larman or
I can never say it anyway. So
so we all know what we're talking about. Anyways, the long and the short of it is that they've fenced off. And they still have a seed bed, natural seed bed there. So they've been able to get regenerative woods that grow in there. And Scott's been really good about, hey, we fence this off. And then, once everything gets to a certain height that we know that the deer can't, cut it back, or anything else, any domestic species, then, they take the fences down and open things up. I have to be honest, Peter, I wish 20 years ago I had invested in a fencing company in the Highlands, because I'd be a gazillionaire right now.
Whoever owns the wire manufacturer, well, it was like the first guys that created barbed wire and went around the States. You're a big owner. Yeah, exactly.
Well, here it would be, because it's crazy what's going on, because not only are they building these fences to keep out deer, but when the trees get to be more than, say, 4 or 5 feet high, which is now, what a deer is looking to eat is going to be the most nutrient-filled part, which will be that apical meristem, the very top of the tree when it's growing. So if you put a little sapling down there, and of course, if it's the weather's crappy, they're going to go and nip that off. Well, of course, guys trying to grow trees, that pisses them off, right? Because now the tree's going to be stunted.
Yep.
That's the whole reason why here. They don't eat trees, guys.
They just survive the sugary bit.
They're not moose.
Yeah.
Okay, which is for a big part of the year is eating trees. But the reality there, I think, is that, when trees get to a certain age class, a certain size, then I think it has to be automatic that you have to pull the fences down.
Yeah.
Get them out of here. Because one thing that people don't realize is that historically, if we really want to get back in time, and this is the same situation we see in Africa with elephants today, these large ungulates, whether it be the red deer, whether it be, the bison that used to be here. Now, we're talking a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
But even cattle, the Highland cattle, most people had a little herd of cattle, and they would get into some of these areas where there are trees, and they kind of break them up, because what happens when you break things up, and which we see in Africa with elephants, is that you get a whole lot more edge. And let's face it, this planet has evolved over time through chaos.
Yep.
Through erosion, through freezing, through fire, cataclysmic chaos. And it's still doing it today. It just does it in a process that doesn't quite work within our mind frames. Even in our 70, 80-year lifespans now, it doesn't quite compute. We can't quite see the end of our nose.
We don't have control of it. That's the biggest problem. It's out of our grasp. The planet does it its own way, but because we can't control it, it's wrong, and therefore it needs to be in a set of rules and regulations.
So it's really important that you get deer into this. I did this several interviews with Dee Ward there on the Roddle Estate in Angus Glens, and Dee's really trying to embrace some of the principles that are almost kind of akin or maybe in line more with the rewilding side. But what he's trying to do, it seems to make more sense to me. The idea is that where we are going to have vegetative cover, where we are going to have trees in those areas that don't have an iron hard pan, that's going to be along those burns, those waterways. They're going to help with absorbing water, because let's face it, certain trees and shrubs can suck a ton of water down, and so you're going to have a lot less water going downstream. And of course, some people have identified that that's an issue here in this country, that there's too much water going downstream. I don't know if that's truly the issue here, but it sounds good. But at the end of the day, I think what he's trying to do is I think pretty smart, in so much as that I think for the sporting estate model to continue to exist, and obviously they are doing the job in conservation. It's the wise use of the natural resource. They're utilizing that natural resource for whatever. It doesn't matter what the motivation is, but they're utilizing that wildlife. They're hunting it. They're shooting it. They're taking a very limited offtake of that, and it's creating a value. And so at the end of the day, I think, if you can start to figure out some ways where the hunting community, the sporting estates start to utilize a lot of the same practices and principles, kind of a industry standard practices, I think at the end of the day, you start to head off some of these arguments about stuff. Because really at the end of the day, what I've come to understand with the film, none of this is about science. None of this is hunting good or shooting good or bad or anything like that. This is all about deep-seated animosity towards one group of people by another group of people. You could say jealousy. Yeah. It could be, you have this long history of, go back far enough in any of your history, you'll find the oppressed to the oppressor. But now you're in a democracy, right? And so, lots of voices, and you only had very few people that were aristocrats, right? And so now you're in a scenario where, these voices can be heard through votes, so through politicians. And of course, there's a lot of people with chips on their shoulders that don't like landowners for whatever reason. And I'm not saying every landowner is the best thing in the world or a great person.
No.
But, the people I've met have been really great people. And it's not, one thing people need to understand is, and what I try to explain to my audience in the United States is that this is not the landed gentry. That every landowner is not an aristocrat. Very few of them are. And quite a few of the landowners that I've met and that we worked with, I mean, it's just everyday people that have either ran a business. Heck, there was one family that the father was a mortician in Glasgow, and he was successful enough to put enough money together to buy a couple thousand acres outside of Dunkeld, and he liked to shoot birds.
Yep.
And that was his deal. It's just a working guy that had this. And even D. Ward, 20 years ago, he had a successful business down south, and he was able to come up and buy a 5,000 acre grouse moor and manage it. But, I've even told people back home, I think if the photographers and I all got together and figured out some way to get a whole bunch of nickels, and we bought ourselves a little piece of grouse moor somewhere in the Highlands, the next day we would be considered evil.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. Because you suddenly own land and you don't let anybody on it.
Yeah. Well, but that's not true either, because you have the right to roam, that's the other thing that was baffling to us. In the United States, we got some pretty serious trespass laws.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in a state in Montana where you almost can pull a gun to keep, if you're concerned about your safety. I mean, you can't by law. But the reality there is that for someone to be able to cross your fence, go down your trail on a mountain bike or hiking, or driving down your roads and stuff, it's against the law.
Yep.
Where I come from.
Whereas here you can just walk wherever you want, pretty much, within reason.
And it makes sense, right? Because, that law was enacted because people are like, I don't like the fact that you own a bunch of land.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And it's been embraced by the broader public. And I've got a second cousin that lives just outside of Edinburgh. And, he went to our screening in Edinburgh for the premiere we had back in end of April. And it was really fascinating to talk to him because, I took him out to dinner and whatnot. I just kind of met these guys in the last year and didn't realize I had this family here and, how things work with the internet. And all of a sudden you're getting emails so talked to them, super nice people. But, there is a definite, just all these little cliques or class systems here. And I don't mean it's about who has money or who has land or whatever else. I mean, he mentioned the fact that, we had a fair number of people from the sporting estates, keepers and whatnot, at the premiere. And then we had government officials. We had a lot of different people, rewilders and stuff. But he said the guys in tweeds didn't really talk to him at all. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, that's just what it is. They're all in their own little deal, and they got their thing. And I was kind of surprised and da-da-da-da-da. And so not everybody here is, there's a lot of issues here. And there's social issues. There's these etiquette issues. There's all kinds of issues, and so none of this is simple. And I don't mean this derogatory, but you Scots are dense, and it took me 150 days in this country over the course of a year and a half of just really diving. I mean, it normally takes me 100 days to make a film on the ground over a period of a year. And it took me a lot more time to really get my head around this. And the other thing, too, is I talked about this photographer, Tony Bynum. He's a good buddy of mine out of Montana. Tony's an enrolled tribal member of the tribe in Western Oregon. And he's also got a master's in land use. And he actually worked at the Environmental Protection Agency, reporting directly to the director of the EPA in Washington, D.C. over Native American issues in the environment. And so, but he became a phenomenal photographer when he decided he didn't want to live in D.C. anymore and deal with all the riffraff and bureaucrats and stuff. But it's fascinating to get his perspective because he's talking about it as an indigenous person. He's looking at, of course, he's got our grandfather who was Scottish,
right?
100%. So so he's really got a connection here, and it was fascinating because when we did some of the screenings, he was part of the panel discussions, and he talked a lot about that indigenous knowledge. It's really important. We feature in the film the Canuck wildfire, the largest fire in the history of the United Kingdom a year ago from now in June. And Ground Zero was almost, Nigel Fraser, the chairman for Trees for Life. And of course, there's a bunch of other government lands there and whatnot that are all been quote unquote rewilded, which means there's a whole bunch of fuel on the ground.
Yep.
Of course, you're dealing with drought at that time. And you had a wildland camper start a fire accidentally. And, almost 20,000 acres blew up. And we interviewed Nigel, and I'll give him a lot of credit because, here's a guy, it's really easy to connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
Trees for life, more fuel on the ground. And he literally says this. He's mic'd up. He's walking around through his land, and you can see just the dust and the soot coming up off his boots as he's walking around, talking about what happened. But one of the cool things that happened there was that, it's a terrible thing to have the wildfire, but, where I'm from, Montana, we deal with it all the time. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
And, but what he talked about was the fact that there were some keepers that came in, and because of their institutional knowledge and their situation awareness, were able to start a backfire that put that fire out.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that that just resonates so well with me. It's like it's that term, fighting fire with fire, and it's that knowledge that's passed down from head keeper to underkeeper all the time, and it is so only they know how to do it. And it's just one of those things that the States, you deal with wildfire, Australia, they deal with wildfires, the UK, we don't very often, but when it does go up, you need that knowledge, those guys. And if you take that away and you get rid of those keepers, there's nobody going to come back in to stop it.
Well, if you get rid of the muir burn,
Yep.
which is why they have that knowledge and the equipment, the tracked equipment with water tanks and stuff. We filmed a muir burn with over just south of Inverness with Ed Jondrell.
Yep.
And he takes a Mars bar, chocolate bar, and sticks it into the heather. And he takes this little section, he mows it, and it's wet underneath all that, but it's dry on the top. And he starts this backfire, and he burns off a little section of it, and it goes out. And then he goes upwind, and he starts this fire, and we're filming it with drones and handheld cameras and all sorts of stuff. And it just sweeps across there and like lickety-flick, and boom. And he goes and he walks over while the ground's still smoldering. He reaches down, picks out the Mars bar. And, he opens it up, and it's just like it came out of the factory. It's not melted, nothing's burned, nothing. Of course, that just completely hit home to me that, you're burning off this what they call rank, obviously, or what we call mature heather. And, we've been burning the land. Like we said earlier at the beginning of the podcast, humans have been terraforming this planet for our own species survival for a long time.
Yes.
And even though this is to propagate, the health of the land for the species of grouse, which of course the coattail effect affects not only all the other waders and everything else, but all the raptors too, right? Because now you got a whole lot more walking McDonald's around.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten the raptor persecution, and which is real. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. But at the end of the day, it's really important that institutional knowledge, that those indigenous rights of the people, those keepers, it's so important. And I'll give Nigel Fraser a lot of credit because he's come out and said, hey, without them, I may have lost my home.
No, and that was a very prominent point in the film.
And he also talked about the fact that Scotland is not prepared for what's going to happen because you can't get away from the fact that there is more fuel on the land. You are going to have more wildfires. You don't have the expertise. You don't have the training. You don't have the equipment to fight it. In fact, in this fire, they had a helicopter out there. They had an A-Star out there that was dropping stuff out. During the fire, when the keeper started the backfire, which I wish I would have been there when it happened, but I wasn't. I came a couple days after the fire was mopping it out. That helicopter tried to put out the backfire. Kind of ironic. Because they had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I even watched the guy with the bucket there on the helicopter, and it was way. I'm used to seeing it way underslung. It was just too short line, and what he was doing, he was.
You guys will have planes, helicopters, but you have
we spent
for it.
Billions of dollars training, equipping, and fighting wildfires every year.
100%.
Billions of dollars.
But that's because it's one of those threats. And the fires out there are massive when they when your wildfires
but
go.
But our fire problem is because of our colonial past, and then the fact that we decided, hey, we're not going to allow any fire. Because I said about Native Americans, when the first Northern Europeans showed up, you had this whole eastern seaboard full of mass producing trees that were, they were the same thing of what Europeans called as mother trees.
Yep.
That would collect all these acorns to feed the pigs in Europe, right? That was the big deal. Well, the North American Indians did the same thing. And literally they had all these mass producing trees, but they burned the heck out of everything to the point where, our early ancestors that came through the Europeans that came into North America, they remarked in their journals that they could literally drive their horses on wagons and sleds through these forests. They were open underneath. Where I live in Montana, we had big ponderosa pine. It lives to be 600 years old. It's gargantuan, beautiful big pine tree. And underneath it was nothing but open grasslands. The reason why is because Native Americans wanted to enhance the land for the production of deer and bison and turkeys, because that is what the habitat is that they need to survive. Sound familiar?
Yeah. It's not rocket science, is it?
No, none of this is.
But I think we've forgotten that, and it just comes back full circle. It's easier to make propaganda, throw it out there, make people give you money, and that's what it really boils down to, isn't
power
it?
And money.
Power and money.
Power and money. Yeah. Because I would think, it's one of the things. I spent quite a bit of time with David Belhari, and I have to tell you, I like David. The first time we sat down to do an interview, he pulled out his iPhone and got the photos and started scrolling through all these photos showing these big stags he shot. Like I said, I'm a hunter myself. We got some common ground.
Yeah.
That's one thing I noticed amongst almost all these people. I don't care if you were the rewilder or if you're somebody from a sporting estate. Yeah, there's fringes that are hardcore one side or the other. But for the most part, I think everybody wants to achieve the same goals. They want to have healthy ecosystems. They want to ensure that these places are going to exist in perpetuity in a healthy way. And I think that's really where all this needs to go. And it's... Unfortunately, I think that the historical bias and the fact that you mentioned that people have motivations of raising money and having power over the situation or other people gets in the way. And it's the solution wise, I say it's almost like the Highlands in Scotland needs an arbitrator.
Yep.
That's not from the UK. Somebody who has some idea about science and common sense. And of course, somebody that can talk about the social issues, because social issues is a big part of it.
Yeah. And I think that's a massive area that there's nobody really driving this boat at the moment. Everybody wants their own bit, and of course, you don't have a direction. It's all going.
And I think that's important that everybody wants kind of similar goals to some extent. Of course, you got people that want to do away with sporting estates and driven grouse shooting and want to get rid of deer and all that stuff. But that's not realistic, really. At the end of the day, landowners do have, whether you like them or not, they're spending their own money enhancing the land. Yeah. There's no tax dollars going into this. No. Whereas rewild estates are almost all tax dollars, and that economic model is not putting people on the land that are there with their families, that are using the local stores, the local pubs, the local schools.
Like the place we're sat in at the moment, we are sat at Pam, who is a kilt and produces tweed.
Pam Blackhall.
Blackhall's. Yeah. And again, her business exists purely because of the estates that people come here.
Yeah, I think what she told me in our interview is that about 34 estates utilize her for their tweeds.
Yep.
And of course, she does have a pretty vibrant business doing kilts.
Yeah.
But that's something that the tweeds is really the uniforms of all these keepers that work on these estates in this part of Scotland, in Aberdeenshire. I mean, it's critical to their business, and she's the third generation owner of it. It's been around for, I want to say, about over 100 years, and that's real.
And you wipe away, or you get rid of all of these estates, and all of a sudden that is the person that does the tweed, the local shop, the school loses a whole population of kids.
Yeah, well, it goes out. They go away.
They go away, and it's not just the estates; it's everything else that goes with it. And estates have had to change their models and things like that, and it has an effect on the community.
Yeah, and I think the rewilding concept is good as it sounds, and I think it sounds, part of it's, to me, it sounds really good. Oh, we're going to have all these people doing wetlands or peatland rehabilitation. We're going to have all these people working in forestry. We're going to have all these people showing up that want to go walk on the land, and they're going to fill up restaurants and lodges and stuff. I sit back, being from Montana, where I live literally 20 minutes from the western entrance of Glacier National Park. So think about snow-capped mountains, glaciers, grizzly bears, bison, elk, deer, turkeys, salmon, a lot, 5 species of grouse, a lot of other upland birds, pheasants included. We have this majestic, beautiful landscapes. Everybody's probably heard of Yellowstone, the TV show.
Yeah.
Well, that's my backyard. And so one of the conversations I had with a rewilder was that they really liked the idea of foreign billionaires buying these sporting estates because they had the money to build the tourism infrastructure. So the restaurants, the lodges, the trails, whatever. And the problem with that is that is someone really going to spend 500 quid a night to sit in a yurt in an area that's not being managed for wildlife anymore? There's a reason why people go to Kruger National Park, because there's all this wildlife. And that's all habituated. It's not wild. But you got carloads and carloads of people down there, sitting in these cruisers, taking pictures of anything and everything they can, right? That's the ultimate form. But if you no longer manage what little wildlife habitat we have to enhance it, to make it as good as it can for wildlife here in the highlands, people in America come here to do what? Play golf, drink whiskey, stalk red deer,
shoot grouse,
and
probably go and shoot pheasants and other stuff fish.
Possibly, salmon. If they could, go for the trifecta there.
But
my point is, who is going to come here to look at rank heather with really no wildlife, with deer that have been exterminated,
with hundreds of trees that you can't see?
With trees. Well, that's the other thing that was crazy. We actually went up to Ben Nevis with David Belhari, and we're up there looking at this beautiful waterfall. The name of it escapes me right now. Beautiful, beautiful waterfall. And this is all on the land that the John Muir Trust owns. And Tony Bynum, our photographer, is looking at this thing and taking pictures, and he looks at David and he goes, "David, what do you do when you can't see this anymore?" And David looked at him and goes, "What are you talking about? It's right here." He goes, "I know, but what are you going to do when you can't see this anymore?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He says, "You got trees planted all around this waterfall. They all grow up. And when they grow up, when the leaves are out, you're not going to see the waterfall anymore. Unless you're standing right in front of it or underneath it." David could not get that through his mind, that somehow these trees, like you drive along the glens here, there's so many trees along these glens, you can't see the hills.
You can't see, exactly.
But why are people going to come here? Well, the only thing people really want to do, besides the things we just talked about, is maybe they want to see some stones or see the backdrops from Outlander, right? An American. They all love it because of a lot of us have Scottish ancestry, and that's really what propels that TV show. It's its U.S. audience, and they want to come here and see what Jamie saw or whatever, And but the reality is that if it's all covered in trees, that's, like we said earlier, that is not the wilderness of Scotland. No. What we imagine and what is sold to people are those craggy granite rocks interspersed with that beautiful purple heather in the summertime in August and September. That is the real wilderness, the real nature of Scotland. And that's, unfortunately, the if you're going to plant trees on it,
you aren't going to see that.
You're not going to have it. And trees aren't going to grow on it, and most of that stuff, unless you forcibly put the trees on the ground. That's the 45-ton track goes. And so, there's a lot of issues to unpack here, but I think there's a future, but there's going to have to. I pretty well think that common ground it exists, but trying to get some of the the people that are really on the fringes to sit back and say, because like I was talking about with Balhara, where I was going with that is that, I asked them, I'm like, well, if you have a problem with deer, why aren't you working with the gamekeepers?
Yeah.
Why aren't you working with the stalkers? I mean, they already have that institutional knowledge. Well, David's a heck of a hunter, right? I already told you, he showed me all these big, huge stags he's been shooting. And of course, he's got all these estates to hunt. And, but, we focused on the film on the Kunag estate, what happened with the Ascent Crofters Trust, the very first community buyout, of private land. And he completely discounts these people, and he wants to eradicate all these deer. And I kept asking him, I said, what's the problem with the deer here? I've been all around your estate. I've flown a drone all over and stuff. And it's not like you're planting trees. You don't have any trees there. There are very few trees on the estate. And that place is rough weather-wise. Trees don't grow very well there. And that doesn't have anything to do with deer from what I can see. And I was able to meet Craig Ross, who at the time was the keeper at Instedam next door. And they were feeding deer in the wintertime. We happened to come by and saw a bunch of stags on the road, so we filmed them. And, of course, his assistant keeper saw us out there, and we parked down. They had no idea who we were. Of course, it looked like just a bunch of city town folk on the side of the road. So while I'm out filming these stags, with a 600-millimeter lens out in this glen, the photographer walked back to the car because the assistant gamekeeper was making as much noise, slamming doors of this house that we had parked next to and everything else. And of course, he started talking to Tony and started accosting him. Like, you understand you can't park here, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, just giving him the fifth degree. Yeah. And Tony's like, hey, you just need to listen. Da-da-da. He didn't want to listen to Tony. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, and then finally Tony's like, listen, we're here making a movie. And the assistant gamekeeper goes, were you guys the guys up at Ardvar Estate and working with the Ascent Crofters Trust and filming stuff? Yep. Oh, shit. Sorry, I didn't really mean that. Yeah, no, whatever you guys want to do. And obviously the word had gotten around the community that we were there. And, we're friendly. Friendly to everybody. But it's just the reality is we're not city folk that, there's a real problem with people coming up.
Totally.
I've been to plenty of places where I just see the trash. I see the people are driving off the roads and everything like that, and just have no concept of what they're doing to nature, which they're harming it. But yeah, and then a little bit later on, I finally walk back and I'm packing up my camera gear, and comes over the hill is the keeper, Craig Ross. And we met him for the first time, and he's I'm so sorry, we didn't know, and if we'd known you were here, and of course we spent the next hour just chit-chatting about stuff and had just this wonderful conversation. Of course, I got invited to come back and go fishing, and I was like, well, that's cool, let's come do some trout fishing someday. It wasn't so dang far in the middle of nowhere, right? So, but yeah, I think, trying to find that common ground is really important, and I'm not sure that you all can do it.
No, I think that's the problem, and I think it's going to take more time, and actually, it's going to take a few people that potentially can be the initiators to actually come together and start to bring in, because you're always going to have people that have their own ideas on the outside of all of that, and until you can actually get them around the table and everybody can start talking about it, we're struggling. And I think that kind of, we've had a fantastic podcast, and it's kind of coming to a nice conclusion here. I think we've touched on it. It's finding that point where we've got to try and get everybody to work together, and hopefully your film going out to the UK audience will give some education for that. And if we can get it mainstream, if that's the plan to go mainstream, it would be fantastic.
It is.
But no.
I mean, our target audience is not the keepers. It's not the hunters.
We all know this. We need it to go. It needs to be in front of. It needs to be in front of your average Joe that's sitting there going, "I want to watch that." The UK is a very difficult place to put something like that, but hopefully, we know we've got already Jeremy Clarkson, and the farm has managed to embrace so many topics, and he even brought deer stalking into it. Hopefully this can do exactly the same.
Well, we can get Jeremy Clarkson to watch the film and talk about it to his audience, but also I'd say to your audience, if you go to shepherdofwildlife.org/keeper, KEEPER, sign up for updates and whatnot. The film is obviously finishing up I think through July. I think we've got some more screenings in the UK. I think there's going to be some stuff down south of the border in Wales. And there may be some more here in Scotland. So we've been doing some screenings in theaters. I've been approached by the theater in Fort William, Aberfeldy, and in Inverness about having the film go on their run a schedule.
Fantastic.
So it'll be available in July, August, September, hopefully, as long as they want to run it and they're making money. But they seem to think that it'll draw more people, even the tourists, to watch it, which is what obviously we want to get those people from the cities to watch it, than maybe some of the Hollywood blockbusters. So, but yeah, the idea is to make it mainstream and the audience too. I mean, talk to, your friends, your neighbors, the people at school, the kids and stuff, the teachers, your local media people. And the more that people get out and talk about it and post about it on social media, go to our social media accounts. We're on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, X, or whatever it is these days. And share and like the stuff and share it with your friends and your family and your business associates. And you'd be surprised if everybody that listens to your podcast, if you got 1,000 people every week to go, okay, you know what, I'm going to go out and do something about this. I'm going to share this, or I'm going to call somebody, or I'm going to email somebody. Then, you get that groundswell. And we will have an educational version, a little 30-minute version available probably in August. That'll be on our website at shepherdswildlife.org. And that'll be something that we can give to organizations for their advocacy work, and anybody who's interested in it. And we do have some interest in the rewilders. I mean, I've had some conversations, like I was saying earlier, with Trees for Life, with Nigel Fraser, about being able to showcase the film in some of the quote-unquote rewilding conferences. We've got some stuff in the United States along those lines, some environmental groups that are real interested in showing, because like I said, it's really fair and balanced. And that's the one thing people have to understand. I mean, I've had a few keepers come a little unhinged, like, why are you giving these people? And I'm like, listen, guys, if the Scottish Gamekeepers Association makes a film, or Trees for Life makes a film, or the John Muir Trust, they all make films, right? They all make videos.
Yeah.
I don't care where you come from. It's nothing but propaganda.
Yeah.
And so that's really important that we keep a really balanced. I try, like I said, I try to stay as neutral as possible in these projects to allow all these competing voices to be heard, because they're important to everybody.
No, 100%.
And so at the end of the day, like I said, if you're not doing that, you're doing nothing but creating propaganda, and you're just not going to have the impact that you have to have. And again, we're at a point now on our planet with 8 billion humans that if we don't really start pushing hard to make sure that there are people out there being good stewards, good shepherds of the land, we're going to lose all this. And that's going to be our legacy. No,
100%. And I think, we as the hunting community have got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm going to say thank you ever so much for sparing us time. I know it's been a bit of a rush to get it organised, but hopefully everybody will enjoy this. The film, you'll be able to see it. And we can just keep
and the other thing too is the film will be available via digital cinema event starting on June 29th through July 29th. So for 30 days at shepherdsofwildlife.org, you'll be able to get on, log on, buy a digital cinema ticket to watch the film. That'll also include the 30-minute panel discussion we did in Edinburgh after the premiere.
Excellent.
Where we had 3 other people talk to me about their first impressions of the film. I understand they're kind of quasi-semi-celebrity type people.
Okay.
I think it'll be helpful for people to do that. We do charge for it, and we're trying to get some money back out of this. And I have to tell you guys, not a single penny to produce this film has come from the United Kingdom.
Right.
This is all American funded. It's all produced by Americans. We got some help from some people doing some film work here. We spent money here, lots of money here.
But this is the problem. What we've touched on this so much. The UK is so disconnected from the whole society of keepering, but that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. I think I've taken up enough of your time as it is. So again, we'll get all the links in the descriptions that's going on. Everybody can have a look at what's happening. But thank you ever so much for being able to spare some time and chat to me.
Yeah, no, Peter, thanks. And thanks to your audience for letting us. Hopefully we can all do the same thing and do the right thing and make an impact on the world.
Superb. Thank you ever so much. thanks for listening to that podcast. Had a few level issues at the beginning, but then trying to record this in a garden shed with all sorts of other things to get sorted out. Finally got there in the end, halfway through the podcast, but we did get the levels right. Tom was a fantastic guest, and his story that he has created, or the story he's telling in the film, is absolutely fantastic, and it's the plight that I think everybody in Scotland is well aware of, and we are suffering on a daily basis. If you went to Scone Game Fair, you will have seen Tom. Hopefully, he was there doing a Q&A session. If you get a chance to see the film, please do. Obviously, again, any feedback you can leave on this, any reviews, that 5-star button, click it, and just help me keep in the top of the charts. Remember to share this podcast with all of your friends. It's not just about hunting. Just get this word out there. It's a very important topic. Thanks again. See you on the next one.